Hello you beautiful people, welcome back to the washing line. It's been a while, but in this video I just wanted to share with you some of the most common things that will come up in your journey as you are shifting out of the hard and heavy yoke of religion and back into the light and easy yoke of Jesus. And that transition, that shift, I find that there are a lot of people who get lost in transition. And so I want to speak to this because there are many of you, and it's been so encouraging to read some of your comments and just to hear about some of your journey where you guys are on, where you're either just realizing for the first time the heavy yoke of religion, of performance Christianity. Maybe you've ended up confused. You've come here because you're exhausted, you're just tired, and you just know that there's something more for you. And so now you're starting to see that his promised rest and his finished work and the light and easy yoke that he always talks about is a real thing, and you're starting to shift towards that. Or maybe you've been in the shift already for some time. Wherever you are, it's been so encouraging to read your comments, and I just want to share with you some of the things that helped me through that transition and shift as well. Because I remember when I went through that shift for the first while, I actually felt really isolated and alone. Not because I wanted to be alone and not because I wanted to be isolated, but because there were few people around me who had either walked out that journey, or there were people who just had never experienced it before, or they just could not articulate the things that I was going through. And so I felt lonely for a long period of time. And so there were different things that came up along that shift in that journey. And I just want to speak to it to help you so that those things that became, I guess, unnecessary blocks for me no longer have to be blocks or hindrance for you. And so I'm going to share with you 3 Ds just to keep it simple, just so that it sticks. And then also 3 Cs to help you to overcome those 3 Ds. And it'll make sense as I go through this anyway. So the first D that you will experience when you are shifting out of the hard and heavy yoke of religion and into the light and easy yoke that Jesus is always inviting us to live from is that you will experience doubt. Now, doubt is very normal. It's very common. And I mean, think about it. When you are leaving everything that you've wrapped God in, everything that you've known, and even a large part of what you've wrapped your identity in, when you're leaving all of that to then enter into what can seem like a foreign world, of course there's going to be doubt. And of course there's going to be fear. And especially when religion and performance Christianity has trained you in a certain way. And so I've said before that religion and performance Christianity hangs on these 3 things: performance, control, and fear. And so performance, control, and fear becomes the hard wiring. It becomes the ingrained way that we think, the way that we see, the way that we read scripture, the way that we view God, the way that we interact with life. It is often through those lenses of performance, control, and fear. And so when you're exiting that to then come into something like his promised rest, it almost becomes this, you can almost feel like, is this deception? Is this real? Like, is this an actual thing? And those are very common questions to have along your journey, is this real? Is this for me? Can I actually live this? Is this an actual thing? Or am I just, am I being deceived? Those are all questions that I ask myself as well, and it's very common. But like I said, when religion has taught you to trust fear, peace can feel like deception, or it can feel wrong. Henry Nouwen, he says this: faith is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to trust anyway. Faith is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to trust anyway. And so doubt is not a sign that you're falling apart. I like to see it rather that doubt is a sign that you're detoxing. And so you're letting go of everything that you once wrapped your Christianity in. You're letting go of old wineskin to now receive new wineskin and thus new wine. But that shift will often cause a lot of doubt, a lot of fear, because you've lived one way for so long. To then embrace this new way, it can be very scary. But I love what Henry Nouwen says there. It's the decision to trust anyway. So that decision to trust is now you're trusting in the promises of Christ. The light and easy yoke of Jesus is his idea. His finished work, it's his idea. His promised rest, it's his idea. And he's always invited us to live from that. But performance and religion has almost masqueraded as him. And so when you finally wake up to it and you see it, this is why it's like, oh my goodness, there is so much more for us. And then making that shift out of everything you know into everything he's inviting us into, that can be scary. And it can feel like you're falling apart. It can feel like you're losing your mind. And like I've said in previous videos, you are losing your mind in the sense that you're losing the mindset that religion trained you in. And you're losing that to now receive him and everything that he always intended for you. And so doubt is the first D that you will experience. You will experience doubt. You ask those questions: is this real? Can I live this? Is this for me? Is it a legit thing? And all those questions around, is this a deception? Am I compromising my faith? Those are all real. I walked it out as well. But like Henry Nouwen says there, it's the decision to trust anywhere. Not just trust airy fairy whatever. You're trusting in your good Father. And you're trusting in Jesus, the one who said, I will send you the Spirit of truth and he will lead you into all truth. And so that's the first D, is that you will experience doubt. The second D that you will experience is discomfort. Now that should be a given. Jesus said, I will send you the Comforter. So if he's sending us the Comforter, it must mean that we're going to experience moments of discomfort. And I can absolutely affirm that. I've experienced so much discomfort in my journey. And like I said, when you're leaving everything that you've known to step into something that you don't know, of course it's going to be uncomfortable. But that's why he sends us the Comforter, so that in the gap, so to speak, when we trust him in the gap, we have his comfort along the way. I wrote this down here, that when you've worn chains for years, freedom won't feel natural, it will feel wrong. And that's just part of the discomfort that you have to be willing to walk through. And so I've learned in my journey that there are 2 comfort zones that you have to be willing to overcome. So the first comfort zone is your own. Then the second comfort zone is other people's comfort zone that they have for you or around you. So one of the ways that I like to explain it is with Israel when they're leaving Egypt to enter into the promised land. And so when they're going through that transition, they exit out of Egypt, they're now in the wilderness on the way to the promised land. You hear the Israelites complaining that, wasn't it so much better when we lived back in Egypt? Why don't we just go back to Egypt? And so what they're saying is they wanted to go back to comfort. And the same is true for you and I, that when we're exiting religion to step into his light and easy yoke, those same inner fears or insecurities will come up for you and I, and that discomfort will cause you to want to retreat. So not only do you have to deal with your own discomfort of change, of growth, but you also have to be willing to face the discomfort of others. So in the same way that the Egyptians then chased after the Israelites because they didn't want them to leave, you may find that there'll be people, there'll be friends, there'll be family who don't want you to grow beyond where you currently are. And that becomes quite a tough comfort zone to walk through. You know, we experienced that. We had many friends who love us dearly, we've done life with, but for many of them, they couldn't understand why we were growing or shifting through the things that we did. And majority of them were very loving and supportive, they just couldn't understand. But then there were 1 or 2 who kind of voiced their concern or their fear. And for some cases, it was an unhealthy criticism. I recall one particular friend who I really honor and really respect. And he's a pastor, and I've spoken at his church at times. But one of the things that he then said was that I'm going AWOL. And then he warned all his congregation to not interact with Lee. And that was very hard because I wasn't going AWOL. Yeah, I was losing my mind of that old comfort zone and performance Christianity that I had once really been attached to. But I finally felt like I was rediscovering Christ for who he really is, without the performance, without the control, without the fear. And it was a beautiful thing. It was a beautiful shift for me, but for others, it wasn't comfortable for them. And so that's part of the journey, is you have to be willing to overcome those 2 comfort zones, your own comfort zone, but then also the comfort zone of others who don't want you to change. And that can be difficult. That can be a hard thing to shift through. Isaiah 30 verse 15 says, "In returning and rest you shall be saved, and quietness and trust will be your strength, but you would not." And so I want to mention this scripture because it is still an image for you and I today, that the offer of rest is always there. Jesus is always inviting us. In the same way that God was inviting Israel into his promised rest, that rest is still available for you and I today. But in the same way that Israel, scripture says here, but you would not. Unfortunately, I see many people who are choosing not to make that same shift into his rest. And that can be one of the harder things. This is why I say that many people get lost in transition because of doubt, because of discomfort. But like Joshua and Caleb, in order to enter into the promised land, you have to be strong and courageous. And that's part of this journey. And this is one of the things that I'll speak to after these 3 C's. But anyway, that's the second D, discomfort. You will experience discomfort. But Jesus has already given you the Comforter to help you in those moments of discomfort. And those 2 comfort zones you have to be willing to break through. Your own comfort zone and then other people's comfort zone that they have of you. The third and final thing that you will experience, or the third D, is discouragement. Or at least you'll be tempted to be discouraged. And part of the reason for this is when you are leaving performance control and fear, which is religion or performance Christianity. I know for myself that when I was heavily under that, when I was heavily in that, is that it was like God was on demand, where I do this, I do that, and then God would do this. And it was like God was very loud, and there was the lights, and there was all the whatever, but God was very loud and very just on demand, so to speak. But when you lay that down and you now pursue, or rather you enter into his promised rest and you enter into the light and easy yoke of Jesus, I found that it seemed like God became silent. And not because he is silent and not because he had changed, but because everything I'd wrapped God in is now I was now beginning to experience him for who he really was. So the God on demand in the religious performance Christianity, I was now meeting this God who now I could no longer control, or at least thought I could control. And so one of the things that often happens in this shift is that the outcomes, the things that you think will happen for you, may not happen the way that you want and may not happen in the time that you want. And that can be a great cause for discouragement. And this is probably where I see most people trip up, is that things don't happen the way that they could previously. So here, God is on demand. I call the shots, so I do this and this happens. But now here, as you enter into this, you realize you're not the one who's in control and that you can't control him. And now it's about surrender and partnership and trust with him, which again opposes performance control and fear. And so I see a lot of people get really discouraged here, and they begin to just think that this is not for them. They begin to think this is not a real thing. And that's probably where I see a lot of people begin to retreat and exit and go back to the comforts of Egypt, so to speak. I wrote this down here, that rest is not passive, it's power. But first, it will dismantle every idol of outcome. And I had to experience that, and it was not comfortable. And I know that for many of you, that may be the exact place where you're at right now, where things are not happening the way that you wanted, and things are not happening the way that you expected. But this is part of the shift in journey, is that you have to be willing to lay down your expectations and what you think the outcome should be to now fully trust and surrender unto him. And so you're not surrendering unto apathy, you're surrendering unto a good father. But that shift can be very tempting to be discouraged by. And so I love when the psalm says, delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. One of the ways I've understood this is that you delight yourself in the Lord, not the outcome. Because when you delight yourself in the Lord, not the outcome, then irrespective of the outcome, your delight is never shaken. But what I find a lot of people is they delight themselves in the outcome. And so they desire the outcome. When the outcome doesn't happen the way that they desire, they throw in the towel, they get upset, and is this actual real thing? And so be willing to delight yourself in the Lord first. It's always about union. It's always about fellowship. It's always about relationship and oneness with him. You know, religion makes it a lot about the outcome. But in the kingdom, I've found he makes it about the journey, because it's in the journey, it's also about forming your being. So it's about who you're becoming more than where you are going. And so delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. But part of that means then is that you don't get to decide what the outcome is and when it happens or how it happens. And so obviously that can be a real point of fear for those who've been trained by control, by performance, by fear. Because in the place of performance, control and fear, you dictate, you know the outcomes already. But when you lay that all down to follow him, you no longer get to decide how and when. You just follow and do what you see your good father doing. And that can be hard for those who are making that shift. But it's possible, is what I'm trying to say. And so there are 3 C's to help you to overcome those 3 D's. So doubt, discomfort, and discouragement. And the 3 C's, the first one is courage. So like I said, Joshua and Caleb, be strong and courageous. In order to enter into the promised land, they had to first take out the giants. And so there will be giants that come up in your life. Doubt might be a giant for you. Discouragement or the temptation to be discouraged might be a giant for you. Discomfort might be a giant for you. Or needing to control everything might be a giant for you. And so you have to be willing to slay those giants along the way. And that takes courage to do that. What I love about that story of Israel exiting Egypt to then go into the promised land is that when they take out the giants, they now get to enter into the promised land of milk and honey. And what's awesome is that everything is already provided for them. The homes are built, the cattle is there, provision is there. They just take out the giants and then they enter in and dwell and enjoy. And so in the same way that Adam was created into rest and into delight, into pleasure and provision, Israel was to enter into the promised land where they experienced the same. Everything was done for them. They just get to dwell and enjoy. Jesus has restored us back to that same reality. But now instead of just being restored back to Eden, we're restored back into the vine. And now in the vine, we find rest. We find delight. We find pleasure. We find union. We find everything that God originally intended from the beginning. But it takes courage. You have to be willing to slay the giants that get in your way. And when I say giants, I'm talking about those inner things, the insecurities, the blockages, the fears, whatever it might be. You have to be willing to slay those giants in order to remove them out the way so that you can finally just enjoy the rest, the provision, the delight that your good father always intended for you. So that's the first C, courage. The second C, community. And so when I say community, I'm just meaning a person or people who can walk out this journey with you. And so like I shared at the beginning, I isolated and alone, not because I wanted to be, but because there was few people who were around that could help me to walk this out. And so I had to look to people overseas. And so I remember reading blogs. I mean, this is going back over 10 years ago now. I remember reading blogs of people who had language to what I was experiencing. And so I would communicate with those people. In fact, there was one particular book that was incredibly pivotal and helpful for me. And it's called The Calling Journey by a guy named Tony Stoltzfus. Now, I'd never heard of the guy before. He's not in the mainstream space. But he has a book called The Calling Journey. Tony Stoltzfus. In fact, I'll link it in the pinned comment there. But that book was so helpful for me. And so when I talk about community, I'm just saying find people, find voices that can help you in your shift, in your journey. So whether that's video messages like this, whether that's books like The Calling Journey by Tony Stoltzfus, or whether you find somebody around, local to you, whatever it might be, in fact, just pray and ask, Father, bring me the people, bring me the community, whether it's few or many, that can help me to walk out this season with you. Whatever it might be, definitely encourage you to find that community. So that's the second C, community. The third and final C, control. And more specifically, let go of control. And this ties in with the temptation to be discouraged in the third D, is that's where I see most people trip up, is that they need control. And which makes sense because, like I said, religion, performance, control, and fear, that's what it is founded on. And so when you're ingrained to have control, even if you don't realize it, and even if you can cover it with language that sounds like surrender, I see this to be the place where many people trip up. And so you have to be willing to let go of control. And letting go of control is not giving up, it's giving over. And letting go of control is not the end, it's just the beginning. And so I know that it can seem so counterlogical and it can seem so counterintuitive. And for many people, it can seem careless, it can seem foolish. And yet in the kingdom, it's true power. Because now I'm letting go unto my good Father. I'm choosing to finally trust and surrender instead of control, perform under fear. I'm now trusting in my good Father. And I'm saying, Father, I'm not giving up unto anything. I'm giving over to you. And I'm allowing you to finally steer the wheel, so to speak, so that I can experience everything that you have for me. But that takes courage to do. And so again, those 3 Ds that you will experience: doubt, discomfort, discouragement, or at least the temptation to be discouraged. But these 3 C's can help you to overcome that. Courage, be strong and courageous. Community, find people who can walk with you. And then control, specifically let go of control. You're not letting go or giving up in the sense that whatever, I'm letting go and I'm giving over to my good Father, who's always in charge anyway, and I'm to walk with him. And so that would be the main things that I would share around this journey. So for those of you who are in the shift, I hope that this helps. I hope that this helps you. And I know that there are many of you who, there is so much more to add to this. It's not just 3 cute Ds or cute Cs. I know that many of you have a lot that you could experience, that you could add for those of us who are in the journey, and it would really help us as well. So please feel welcome to share it. I'm not anybody's God or guru. I'm just sharing what has helped me, what's been beneficial for me in my journey, and hope that it would help others like you as well on your journey too. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear what's helped you in your journey. And if you are somebody who does want support on this, you want help, maybe you want that community aspect that we were talking about before. I have an online Goodness Journey community. I also offer one-on-one coaching, so you're more than welcome to reach out if you want that. No pressure, just an invitation. But the main point of all these messages and what I'm trying to say today is that the light and easy yoke of Jesus is real. His promised rest is real. His finished work is real. And he invites all of us to live in that reality, and it's possible. Along the way, you will experience discomfort. You have moments of thinking, oh, wasn't Egypt better? Wasn't Egypt way more comfortable? Why don't we just go back to Egypt? But my heart, my desire for you is that the land of milk and honey, meaning the promised rest of Christ, this union, this fellowship with him, it is so real, and he's inviting us into that. Slay the giants along the way. They will come up, but things come up to come out, not to haunt you, not to determine or put a verdict on who you are. No, doubt, like I said, is not a sign of your faith falling apart. It is a sign of somebody who's detoxing from religion, letting go of old wineskin, so that now they can receive the new wineskin and thus receive new wine. It's possible. It's his idea. He invites us all into it, and it's available for you today. So bless you.